Hey, Frog Prince Rana here, and thank you for dropping by. Now, the original story was right up my alley, but this whole mess started and ended before I started my YouTube channel, and I missed out on that. But this is more on the current aftermath. First, I would like to thank Thunderfoot for his great work. Some of the footage I have used here is from his video Theranos Busted. Link, of course, is in description. And I will highly recommend checking that video out, including his other debunk videos. Now a primer on Elizabeth Holmes and the biggest tech scam ever perpetuated.
Elizabeth Holmes was everything Silicon Valley and the media could hope for. A brilliant young female entrepreneur who dropped out of Stanford at the age of 19 to start a company called Theranos.
Now the following is important to understand this person and how she presented herself, as her trial is finally upon us and her lawyer is making some very bold claims. In 2014, Elizabeth Holmes, then 30 years old, was on top of the world. A Stanford University dropout, she had founded a company valued at $9 billion for supposedly bringing about a revolution in diagnosing disease.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. We've made it possible to run comprehensive laboratory tests from a tiny sample or a few drops of blood that could be taken from a finger.
She almost became a beacon to females everywhere.
People talk about glass ceilings. I always say that next to every glass ceiling there's an iron lady.
With a few drops of blood, Theranos promised that its Edison test could detect conditions such as cancer and diabetes quickly without the hassle of needles. Bigwigs from Henry Kissinger to General James Mattis sat on the board. US Treasury Secretary George Schultz, media tycoon Rupert Murdoch, and America's richest family, the Waltons, were among her backers. The support lent her credibility, as did her demeanour. I knew she'd had this brilliant idea and that she had managed to convince all these investors and scientists, said Dr. Jeffrey Flyer, the former dean of Harvard Medical School. Holmes became the world's youngest female self-made billionaire in 2015, and at the time was compared to the Apple co-founder Steve Jobs, whom she idolized and attempted to emulate with her uniform of black turtlenecks. She even worked on her voice to sound, dare I say, masculine.
You have to be taken seriously. You just can't have this voice for the rest of your life. Just get it together, Liz. Get it together. You have to practice.
I'm the inventor of the Edison. This is my accent from Washington, D.C.
When she came to me, she didn't have a low voice.
She didn't?
Nope.
What was her voice like when she came to you?
It was just like a typical undergrad student. When I next saw her again was at the Harvard Medical School board meeting where she was being introduced. She says with this low voice, and I'm like, oh my God.
But it all began to unravel in 2015 when a whistleblower raised concerns about Theranos' flagship testing device, the Edison. The Wall Street Journal wrote a series of damning exposes claiming the results were unreliable and the firm had been using commercially available machines made by other manufacturers for most of its testing.
According to Walgreens, Theranos said their technology had been comprehensively validated and was viable and consumer-ready.
The information is only actionable if it is of the highest level of integrity. I think about it as my mom goes to get a test in one of these locations. I want to know every single time that that data is flawless no matter what.
Lawsuits piled up, partners cut ties, and in 2016, US regulators banned Ms. Holmes from operating a blood testing service for 2 years. Ms. Holmes was exposed as a fake. The technology she touted didn't work at all, and by 2018, the company she founded had collapsed. Theranos was dissolved. Ms. Holmes faces 12 fraud charges over her role at the now defunct blood testing firm which was once worth $9 billion. She is accused of deceiving investors and patients by claiming Theranos could detect common illnesses using just a few drops of blood from a finger prick. Her lawyer said she was simply a naive businesswoman whose farm failed. Failure is not a crime. Trying your hardest and coming up short is not a crime. Lance Wade, a lawyer for the defense, said in his opening statement on Wednesday. Mr. Wade also added that Ms. Holmes did not intend to defraud, but instead naively underestimated the challenges her business faced. In the end, Theranos failed and Ms. Holmes walked away with nothing, he told the jurors in San Jose. He added that the former executive was motivated by Theranos' mission, not money, and committed to that mission until that very last day. By the time this trial is over, you will see that the villain the government just presented is actually a living, breathing human being who did her best each and every day, and she's innocent. Miss Holmes, now 37, faces up to 20 years in prison if found guilty of the 12 charges of fraud against her. She has never previously told her side of the story. Her trial, U.S. versus Elizabeth Holmes, will be closely watched, and she is expected to plead not guilty. And in a twist, it emerged this weekend that her lawyer will argue that her ex-boyfriend and business partner, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, sexually abused and emotionally controlled her at the time of the alleged crime, impairing her mental state. Mr. Balwani, 56, who faces the same fraud charges, called the claims outrageous. It will be up to a jury to decide with what sympathy or harshness to judge the woman who fooled everyone from statesmen to secretaries. Miss Holmes was released on bail and in 2019 got married to William Billy Evans, an heir to the Evans Hotel Group chains of hotels. They had a son in July this year. I don't think her being a new mother will influence the trial, but the judge is likely to take it into account if she is found guilty, said Emily D. Baker, a former deputy district attorney of Los Angeles and legal commentator who is not connected to the case. As the Theranos scandal reaches trial, commentators say it is remarkably how tightly she has clung to her original story, and people who knew her say they doubt she has changed. According to court papers, Ms. Holmes' lawyers are said to argue that she believed any alleged misrepresentations about Theranos were true, and that it was a legitimate business generating value for investors. They say Theranos' former chief operating officer, who will be tried separately next year, controlled how she dressed, what she ate, and with whom she spoke for over a decade. They will also call a psychologist specializing in sexual abuse as a witness. Whether Miss Holmes will take the stand herself is unclear. The toughest thing with any case involving fraud is proving that the person intended to defraud, said Ms. Baker. So prosecutors will have to use her text and emails and argue that she knew the technology didn't work but said it did anyway. The defense and prosecution have identified more than 140 potential witnesses in the case, including investors and former Theranos employees. The government has to prove intent, a high burden, said Barbara McCord, a former prosecutor and law professor at the University of Michigan. Holmes' lawyer could attempt to confuse the jury or cast doubt on her intent to defraud. She said creating confusion can be a useful tactic on cross-examination to try to trip up witnesses and attack the government's arguments. If the jury cannot understand the case, then they cannot return a guilty verdict because it's the government's burden to prove each and every element of each offense beyond a reasonable doubt, she said. John Carreyrou, an investigative reporter who published the first articles casting doubt on Theranos in 2015, said, Holmes has got an extraordinary tolerance for risk, because to pull off what she pulled off, going live with a blood testing device that didn't work, that takes chutzpah, he said. And now, when most people would have played out, she has chosen to take this trial to court. She is rolling the dice. Well, as she was actively pushing a medical technology that allegedly she knew didn't work, hopefully the court will come to a guilty verdict, not for vengeance, but to deter future criminals to play with human lives. Well, that's all for today. If you found it worthy, please leave a like and even share it around. If you want to be super awesome, please consider subscribing and so on. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated and helpful for growth of my channel. Thank you so much for watching. Wherever you are, have a safe day. Signing off.